The stars in the Valorian system shimmered like scattered diamonds against the darkness of space. One by one, warships emerged from the swirling blue portals of faster-than-light travel. The Avixian vessels arrived first, their hulls smooth and silver, shaped like elegant daggers cutting through the void. Next came the Torthian fleet, their ships covered in intricate patterns that glowed with soft purple light. The Kelvaxi brought their massive carriers, each one housing hundreds of fighter craft. Within an hour, over 200 ships from 12 different species had gathered in formation. Commander Zixthar stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Times Glorious Talon Asterisk. His 4 eyes scanned the tactical display with satisfaction. The coalition was strong. The Kravashi Dominion would regret their invasion of neutral space. His communications officer chirped softly, indicating all fleet commanders were ready for the briefing. "We are missing one vessel," the officer said, his translator converting his clicks and whistles into standard galactic speech. "The human ship." Zixthar's primary eyes narrowed. "When did they enter FTL?" 6 hours before we did, Commander." A ripple of amusement passed through the bridge crew. 6 hours head start, and still not here? The humans were newer to the galactic community, having only achieved FTL travel 80 years ago. Their technology was primitive compared to species who had been traveling the stars for millennia. But this was embarrassing even for them. 2 more hours passed. The fleet waited in formation, weapons ready, shields charged. Still no human vessel. The communication channels buzzed with jokes and mockery. Perhaps they got lost? One Torthian captain suggested, laughter in his voice. "Maybe they stopped to ask for directions," another added. "I heard human FTL drives are powered by burning ancient plant matter," a Kelvaxi commander said. "Perhaps they ran out of fuel." Even Zixthar allowed himself a small smile. The humans had courage. He would grant them that. They had fought bravely in the border skirmishes against the Kravashi. But their technology was simply inferior. Their ships were slow, clunky things that looked like they had been assembled in a junkyard. Finally, a swirling portal opened at the edge of the formation. The human vessel emerged. The Times UNSC, Relentless Times, was not a beautiful ship. Where the other vessels were sleek and graceful, it was blocky and industrial. It looked more like a floating factory than a warship. The front section was dominated by a massive rectangular structure that extended along nearly the entire length of the ship. Docking ports and sensor arrays stuck out at odd angles. The hull was gray and pitted, showing signs of repair and modification. "The humans have finally waddled in," someone broadcast on the open channel. Laughter followed. Zixthar opened a direct line to the human ship. "Human vessel times. Relentless asterisk. You are 3 hours behind schedule. Is your vessel experiencing technical difficulties?" A human woman's face appeared on his screen. She had brown skin, dark hair pulled back tightly, and calm brown eyes. Commander Elena Vasquez looked utterly unbothered by the implied insult. "Negative, Commander Zixthar. Our FTL drive is operating within normal parameters. We have arrived as quickly as our technology allows." "I see," Zixthar said, struggling to keep the condescension from his voice. "Please take your position in the rear defensive line. We cannot risk your vessel in the primary engagement if you cannot maneuver quickly enough." More laughter crackled across the communication channels. The rear defensive line was where the weakest ships stayed, protecting supply vessels and medical frigates. It was a polite way of saying the humans would be useless in the actual fight. Vasquez's expression did not change. "Understood, Commander. Requesting coordinates for optimal firing position." "Firing position?" Zixthar could not hide his surprise. "Human vessel. The rear defensive line is 200,000 kilometers behind the main engagement zone. You will be out of effective weapons range." "Negative, Commander," Vasquez replied calmly. "We will be exactly where we need to be. Please transmit coordinates." Zixthar gestured to his communications officer, who sent the data. The human ship began its slow journey to the rear of the formation. Even its sublight engines were sluggish compared to other vessels. It moved like a cargo hauler rather than a warship. Did they bring a weapons platform by mistake? One captain joked on the open channel. Maybe it is full of supplies. Humans do love their food rations. I heard they still use chemical explosives. Perhaps they will throw rocks at the enemy. Vasquez heard every word. Her crew heard every word. But her face remained calm and professional as she maneuvered the Times, relentless Times, into position. Beside her, Lieutenant Chen worked at the weapons console, his fingers dancing across the controls. The other ships do not understand, Chen said quietly. They will, Vasquez replied. They always do. Eventually, she watched the tactical display as the Times, relentless Times, settled into its assigned position, far behind the sleek, fast ships of the coalition fleet, far from where anyone expected the real fighting to happen. She allowed herself a small smile. The other species had faster ships, better shields, more advanced energy weapons. They had been traveling between stars when humanity was still figuring out agriculture, but they did not understand one simple truth about humans. When you cannot outrun the enemy, you make sure you can outgun them. The Times, relentless Times, had arrived. Everyone would understand exactly what that meant. Commander Elena Vasquez remembered the day everything changed for humanity's place in the galaxy. It had been 15 years ago, in a briefing room deep within the United Nations Space Command headquarters on Earth. Admiral Rodriguez had stood at the front of the room, his weathered face grim as he displayed the technical specifications of alien FTL drives. The numbers had been humbling. The Avixian FTL systems were 40% faster than human drives. The Torthians were 60% faster. Some species could cross distances in half the time it took human ships. We are outmatched, Rodriguez had said bluntly. We have been studying their technology for decades. Our best engineers say we are at least 2 centuries away from matching their FTL capabilities. Maybe more. Ender. Ender. Amder. The room had fallen silent. Earth had fought hard to earn its place at the galactic table. Humanity had proven itself brave and resourceful in several minor conflicts. But courage meant nothing if you arrived at the battle after it was already over. Then Commander Sarah Chen, the chief weapons engineer, had stood up. Vasquez remembered her words clearly. If we cannot outrun them, we must outgun them. We only need to be fast enough to arrive. What matters is what happens when we get there. The room had erupted in discussion. How could humanity compete with species that had thousands of years of weapons development? The aliens had energy shields that could absorb tremendous damage. They had plasma weapons and particle beams that could cut through armor like paper. Chen had smiled and pulled up a new display. They have spent millennia perfecting energy weapons to defeat energy shields. But there is one weapon type they have largely abandoned. One they consider primitive and inefficient. Kinetic weapons, Vasquez had whispered. Exactly, Chen had confirmed. They do not use them because energy shields can deflect small projectiles. But what if the projectile is not small? What if we build a weapon so powerful that shields become irrelevant? The idea had been radical. No, it had been insane. But humanity had always excelled at insane solutions. Now, 15 years later, Vasquez stood on the bridge of the Times UNSC. Relentless asterisk. The result of that insane idea surrounded her. The ship was slow because 60% of its internal structure was dedicated to a single weapon, the magnetic accelerator cannon. Lieutenant Chen, nephew of the original designer, worked at the weapons console. His fingers moved across the controls with practiced precision. Mac system online, he reported. Reactor 2 is dedicated to weapons charging. Magnetic coils are aligned. Capacitors at 30% and climbing. Vasquez nodded. The Mac was simple in concept. Use powerful electromagnets to accelerate a tungsten slug down a rail. The slug weighed 3 tons. When fully charged, the Mach would accelerate it to 4%, the speed of light. The kinetic energy at impact would be devastating. Other species used energy weapons because they were clean and efficient. Humanity used kinetic weapons because they were unstoppable. Energy shields could deflect or absorb energy, but a 3-ton chunk of tungsten, moving at 12,000 kilometers per second, simply punched through. "How long until full charge?" Vasquez asked. 17 minutes, Commander. She watched the tactical display. The coalition fleet was forming up for battle. Ships moved into their assigned positions with practiced grace. Fighters launched from carriers. Weapons systems came online across 200 vessels. The other commanders still did not understand why the Times, Relentless Times, had positioned itself so far back. They thought it was cowardice or weakness. Let them think that. Humans had learned long ago that being underestimated was an advantage. Her communications officer spoke up. "Commander, incoming transmission from Zeke's Thar." The Avixian commander's face appeared on screen. "Commander Vasquez, our sensors show an unusual power signature from your vessel. Your reactor output is extremely high. Is everything functioning properly?" Vasquez kept her expression neutral. "All systems are operating within normal parameters, Commander. We are simply preparing our weapons systems." "I see." Zixthar looked puzzled. "Your power levels seem excessive for your position. You are far from the battle zone. We are exactly where we need to be," Vasquez replied calmly. Zixthar seemed about to say more, but alarms sounded on both bridges. The sensors had detected something. Multiple FTL signatures. The Kravashi Dominion had arrived. 47 warships emerged from FTL in perfect formation. The Kravashi vessels were dark and angular, covered in thick armor plating. Their shields came online immediately, glowing red around each hull. They had come for war. The coalition fleet surged forward to meet them. Energy weapons began firing. Plasma bolts and particle beams created a light show across the darkness. Shields flared as they absorbed impacts. The battle had begun. The Relentless Times remained in its distant position, watching, waiting. Chen's voice was steady. "Mach charge at 65%. Target lock acquired on the Kravashi flagship. Tracking solution stable." Vasquez allowed herself a thin smile. The Kravashi had ignored the slow human ship in the back. They focused on the faster, closer threats. Exactly as expected. "Charge at 80%, Chen reported. The battle intensified. A Torthian cruiser took heavy damage, its shields failing. 2 Kelvaxi fighters exploded as Kravashi point defense systems found their mark. The coalition was holding. But the Kravashi were fierce opponents. 95%, Chen said. Vasquez leaned forward in her chair. "All crew, prepare for Mach discharge. Secure all loose items. 100%. Mach fully charged and ready to fire, Commander." Vasquez took a slow breath. Humanity had been mocked for its slow ships, ridiculed for its primitive technology, dismissed as barely worth, including in the coalition. Time to change that perception. Fire. The space around the Valorian system burned with weapons fire. Energy beams crossed the darkness in brilliant streaks of color. Plasma bolts exploded against shields in orange and blue bursts. The coalition fleet of over 200 ships engaged the 47 vessels of the Kravashi Dominion in a deadly dance. On the bridge of the Times Glorious Talon Asterisk, Commander Zixthar monitored the battle with growing concern. The Kravashi were living up to their fearsome reputation. Their shields were stronger than expected. Their weapons hit harder. Already 3 coalition ships had been destroyed, and a dozen more were badly damaged. "Focus fire on their cruiser formations," Zixthar commanded. "We need to break their defensive screen before we can reach their capital ships." His tactical officer worked frantically. "Commander, the Kravashi flagship is repositioning. They are moving to flank our left wing." Zix-Thar cursed in his native language. The Kravashi commander was skilled. The battle that should have been a quick coalition victory was becoming a brutal slugging match. He glanced at his sensor display, noting the positions of all friendly vessels. Far in the back, 200,000 kilometers from the fighting, the human ship Times, relentless Times, sat motionless, still out of range, still useless, or so he thought. His sensor officer's voice cut through the chaos of battle. "Commander, I am detecting an unusual energy signature from the human vessel." "Not now," Zix-Thar snapped. "We have more important concerns. Sir, the power output is enormous, far beyond what their reactor should be capable of. It is still climbing." Zix-Thar spared a glance at the detailed readout. His eyes widened. The human ship was generating power levels comparable to a small star. What were they doing? "Open a channel to the human ship," he ordered. Before the connection could be established, his sensor officer shouted, "Commander! Massive energy spike from the Times Relentless Asterisk. Something is happening." On the bridge of the Times Relentless Asterisk, Lieutenant Chen's hands moved across the firing controls with absolute precision. The magnetic accelerator cannon had reached full charge. The capacitors hummed with barely contained energy. Magnetic coils that ran the length of the ship aligned perfectly. The tungsten slug sat in the firing chamber, ready. The targeting computer painted a perfect solution on the Kravashi flagship, 200,000 kilometers away. The massive vessel was 3 times the size of any coalition ship. Its shields glowed bright red, deflecting dozens of energy weapon impacts every second. It was the command center of the entire Kravashi fleet. "Target locked," Chen reported, his voice perfectly calm. "All systems green. Mac, ready to fire." Commander Vasquez sat perfectly still in her command chair. She had made this calculation 1,000 times in simulations, had practiced this moment until it became second nature. But simulations were different from reality. This shot needed to be perfect. Around her, the bridge crew worked in focused silence. The engineering station showed Reactor 2 at maximum output, feeding all its power to the Mac. The structural integrity monitors showed green across the board. The ship could handle the recoil. "Fire," Vasquez said quietly. Chen pressed the firing stud. The Times, Relentless Times, shuddered. Every light on the ship dimmed as capacitors discharged in a single instant. The magnetic coils activated in sequence, creating a powerful electromagnetic field that accelerated down the length of the barrel. The 3-ton tungsten slug, shaped like a simple rod, was caught in that field. In less than a second, the slug went from 0 to 12,000 kilometers per second. 4%, the speed of light. The kinetic energy, contained in that simple metal rod, was equivalent to a small, nuclear weapon. The slug left the barrel and crossed the empty space between the Times, Relentless Times, and the Kravashi flagship. At that speed, the journey took less than 3 seconds. From an external view, there was almost nothing to see. No bright beam of energy, no glowing projectile, just a faint distortion in space as the tungsten rod moved at relativistic speeds. The Kravashi flagship's shields were designed to deflect energy weapons. They could absorb the impact of plasma bolts and particle beams by dispersing and converting the energy. Against energy weapons, they were nearly impenetrable. Against a 3-ton slug of tungsten moving at 4% light speed, they might as well have been tissue paper. The slug hit the flagship's bow. It did not explode. It did not need to. The kinetic energy alone was devastating. The shield flickered once and collapsed. The tungsten rod punched through the armor plating as if it were not there. It traveled through the entire length of the ship in a fraction of a second, passing through bulkheads, machinery, power cores, and crew quarters. When it exited the stern, the flagship was already dying. The passage of the slug had created a tunnel of destruction through the ship's core. Structural supports had been severed. Power systems had been breached. The fusion reactor containment had been compromised. For one heartbeat, The massive vessel seemed intact. Then, it broke apart. The explosion was magnificent and terrible. The fusion reactor went critical, adding its energy to the destruction. The flagship split into 3 large sections and hundreds of smaller pieces. The shockwave caught 3 nearby Cravashi cruisers, damaging their shields and hulls. Across every ship in both fleets, on every communications channel, there was absolute silence. 5 full seconds of stunned, complete silence. The fastest ship in the Coalition fleet could not have crossed that distance in less than 30 seconds. The human ship, the slowest vessel present, had reached out and touched the enemy flagship from 200,000 kilometers away and destroyed it with a single shot. On the Times glorious Talon asterisk, Zixthar stared at his tactical display in disbelief. The Cravashi flagship's icon had simply vanished. Gone. One moment it had been there, coordinating the entire enemy fleet. The next moment, it was debris. What happened? He whispered. What weapon was that? His sensor officer was frantically reviewing the data. Commander, I do not understand. There was no energy beam, no missile launch. The sensors detected only a brief gravitational distortion, and then, impact. Replay the sensor data, Zixthar demanded. They watched the recorded data. The massive power buildup in the human ship. Then a release of energy. Then, nothing their sensors could properly track. Just the result. The flagship destroyed from the inside out. Commander Vasquez's calm voice came over the open channel, heard by every ship in the system. Lieutenant Chen, begin charging for Shot 2. Target the carrier. Shot 2. The humans could do that again. The debris field that had been the Cravashi flagship spread outward into space. Twisted metal, burning fuel, and the bodies of crew members drifted in the void. The 3 cruisers caught in the blast struggled to restore their damaged systems. Alarm klaxons wailed across their bridges. On the bridge of the Cravashi carrier Times Eternal Wrath asterisk, Commander Vecnar watched in horror. The flagship had been destroyed. Admiral Kreshtar was dead. The entire command structure of the invasion fleet had been eliminated in a single instant. What hit us? Vecnar demanded. His scales had gone pale with shock. What weapon was that? His sensor officer's tentacles trembled as he worked the console. Unknown, Commander. Our systems detected no energy weapon discharge, no missile launch. There was simply impact. That is impossible. Nothing can bypass shields like that. The data does not lie, Commander. The flagship's shields were at full strength. They offered no resistance. The projectile passed through, as if they were not there. Vecnar turned to stare at the tactical display. 200,000 kilometers away, far from the main battle, a single human vessel sat motionless. That ugly, blocky ship that everyone had mocked. The ship that should have been irrelevant. His communications officer spoke urgently. Commander, intercepting human communications. They are preparing to fire again. Target designated as us. Fear clutched at Vecnar's chest. The humans were going to fire again. At his ship. The carrier held 3,000 crew members and 500 fighter craft. It was the second most valuable vessel in the fleet, and the humans were going to destroy it, just like they had destroyed the flagship. Evasive maneuvers, Vecnar shouted. Maximum thrust. Get us out of here. The Times Eternal Wrath Times was a massive ship, designed to carry fighters rather than engage in direct combat, but it had powerful engines. The vessel began to turn, trying to accelerate away from the human ship's line of fire. On the Times Relentless asterisk, Lieutenant Chen watched his tactical display with professional calm. Target is attempting evasive maneuvers. Updating. Firing. Solution. Commander Vasquez nodded. How long until we can fire again? Mac charge at 42%. We need another 8 minutes for full charge. 8 minutes. In a space battle, that was an eternity. The Kravashi carrier was already moving, trying to put other ships between itself and the times. Relentless asterisk. If they waited too long, they might lose the shot. But Vasquez had learned patience. Rushing led to mistakes. And a missed shot from the Mac meant waiting another 17 minutes to recharge. Maintain target lock, she ordered. Continue charging. Across the battlefield, the combat had changed completely. The coalition ships had stopped their advance. The Kravashi fleet had stopped firing. Both sides were watching the human vessel and the Kravashi carrier. Zixthar opened a channel to Vasquez. "Commander, what weapon are you using? Our sensors cannot identify it." Vasquez allowed herself a slight smile. "Magnetic accelerator cannon, Commander. Kinetic energy weapon. We accelerate a solid projectile to a significant fraction of light speed." "Kinetic?" Zixthar sounded stunned. "But shields are designed to." "That is." He trailed off as understanding dawned. "Energy shields do not deflect solid matter." "Correct," Vasquez confirmed. "Our shields can. Theirs cannot. The Kravashi have optimized their defenses against energy weapons. They have left themselves vulnerable to kinetic strikes, but the power requirements must be enormous. The recoil alone is why our ship is built the way it is," Vasquez said. "We are slow because we dedicated most of our ship's structure to carrying and firing the Mac. We arrive late because our engines must push more mass. But once we arrive, we only need one shot." On his bridge, Zixthar looked at the human ship with new eyes. Not a slow, primitive vessel. A mobile artillery platform. A siege weapon designed for a single purpose: to kill large targets. At extreme range. The Times' eternal wrath times was still trying to flee. But space was vast and empty. There was nowhere to hide. The carrier's engines pushed it to maximum speed. But it was still moving in a predictable path. "Mac charge at 70%, Chen reported. "Target tracking is stable." The Kravashi fleet was in chaos. Without their flagship and admiral, individual captains were making their own decisions. Some continued fighting the coalition ships. Others moved to protect the carrier. A few of the smaller vessels were already turning away, preparing to flee into FTL. Vecnar knew his ship was doomed. He could feel it in his bones. The human weapon had killed the flagship from 200,000 kilometers away. His carrier was even larger, even easier to hit. There was no escape. "All fighters launch," he ordered quietly. "Scatter formation. At least some of them may survive." Fighter craft began pouring from the carrier's launch bays. Hundreds of small, fast ships accelerating in all directions. If the carrier was going to die, at least its pilots might live. "Mac charge at 90%, Chen said on the Times' relentless asterisk. Vasquez watched the carrier on her display. It was still trying to run, still hoping for a miracle. She felt no joy in what was about to happen. War was a terrible thing, but the Kravashi had chosen to invade neutral space. They had chosen violence. Humanity was simply answering with overwhelming force. "Mac charge complete," Chen announced. 100%. "Ready to fire on your command." Vasquez took a breath. Fire. The Times. Relentless Times shuddered again. The lights dimmed. Another tungsten slug accelerated down the magnetic rails and launched into space at 12,000 kilometers per second. The Times' eternal wrath times never had a chance. The slug hit the carrier amidships, punching through its landing bays and fuel storage. Unlike the flagship, the carrier did not break apart immediately. Instead, it erupted into a rolling series of explosions as fuel tanks and ammunition stores ignited. The ship became an expanding ball of fire and debris. The destruction of 2 capital ships in less than 10 minutes broke the Kravashi fleet's will completely. The remaining ships stopped fighting. Their formation collapsed. Vecnar, in the seconds before his death, managed to send one final transmission, a message to all Kravashi vessels, a single word: Retreat. The Kravashi fleet turned and fled. Those ships capable of FTL jump activated their drives immediately. Others limped away on damaged engines, desperate to reach minimum safe distance. Within 5 minutes of the carrier's destruction, every surviving Kravashi vessel was running for their lives. The coalition fleet did not pursue. They simply watched in stunned silence as their enemy fled the battlefield. Commander Vasquez sat back in her chair. Stand down from combat alert. Begin post-firing diagnostics on the MAC system. Well done, everyone. The battle was over. 2 shots. 2 capital ships destroyed. An entire invasion fleet routed. The slow human ship had ended the war before the coalition's faster vessels had even gotten warmed up. The Valorian system was quiet now. The debris from 2 Kravashi capital ships drifted in, slowly expanding clouds. Coalition medical frigates moved through the battlefield, searching for survivors and recovering the dead. The victory had been total and surprisingly bloodless for the coalition. Only 3 ships destroyed, a dozen damaged. The Kravashi had suffered catastrophic losses. On the bridge of the Times' glorious Talon asterisk, Commander Zixthar stared at the after-action reports. His mind still struggled to process what he had witnessed. 2 shots. The human ship had fired exactly twice, and the battle was over. His communications officer approached hesitantly. Commander, we are receiving a request from the Times' relentless asterisk. Commander Vasquez asks permission to come aboard for debriefing. Zixthar blinked in surprise. She wishes to come here? Yes, Commander. She says face-to-face communication would be more efficient for coordinating our report to the Galactic Council. Zixthar felt a flush of shame. He had mocked this human commander, had questioned her competence, had assigned her vessel to the rear, because he thought it would be useless, and she had just saved the entire fleet with clinical precision. Grant permission immediately, he said. And prepare a formal welcome. Full honors. An hour later, Commander Elena Vasquez stood in the docking bay of the Times' glorious Talon asterisk. She was shorter than Zixthar had expected. Humans were a small species compared to most galactic races. She wore a simple gray uniform with minimal decoration, but she carried herself with quiet confidence. Zixthar approached and performed the traditional Avixian gesture of respect, lowering all 4 eyes briefly. Commander Vasquez, welcome aboard. I must offer my sincere apologies for my earlier words. Vasquez smiled slightly. No apology necessary, Commander. You reacted based on the information available to you. Our ships are slow. That is simply fact. But I underestimated you. Zixthar insisted. I underestimated your species and your capabilities. That was wrong of me. Greenling the Fawner. Greenling the Fawner. Greenling the Fawner. Greenling. I wasig. Greenling. They walked together toward the conference room. Other coalition commanders were already gathering, their holographic projections appearing around the central table. Every species wanted to understand what they had witnessed. Your weapon, Zixthar said as they walked. This magnetic accelerator cannon. I have studied the sensor data. The physics are sound, but the engineering. How do you generate that much power? How does your ship survive the recoil? Vasquez seemed to consider how much to share. The MAC requires a dedicated fusion reactor. We call it Reactor 2. Its sole purpose is to charge the weapon's capacitor banks. As for the recoil, the entire ship is essentially built around the weapon. Structural reinforcement runs the length of the hull. The MAC barrel is the spine of the ship. Your entire vessel is designed around a single weapon, Zixthar said slowly, understanding dawning. That is why you are slow. The mass of the weapon and its support systems. Exactly. We cannot match your FTL speed. We cannot match your maneuverability. So, we focused on what we could build. overwhelming firepower from extreme range. They entered the conference room. Dozens of holographic aliens turned to look at Vasquez. She saw curiosity in their expressions now. Not mockery. Respect. Not dismissal. A Torthian admiral spoke first, his purple features thoughtful. Commander Vasquez, your weapon bypassed the Cravashi shields completely. This changes everything we know about fleet tactics. Vasquez nodded. Energy shields deflect energy. They are very good at it. But they were never designed to stop physical projectiles moving at relativistic speeds. Most species abandoned kinetic weapons centuries ago because they seemed primitive. We simply brought them back with modern engineering. A Kelvaxi commander leaned forward. How many of these Mac ships does humanity have? And 7 currently in service, Vasquez replied honestly. We are building more, but the construction time is significant. Each ship takes 5 years to complete. Zixthar did the calculation in his head. 7 ships. 7 weapons that could kill capital ships from ranges where most fleets could not even fire back. Humanity had quietly built a fleet-killing force while everyone dismissed them as technologically backward. Your ship is not slow, Zixthar said quietly. It is a mobile siege weapon. Vasquez's smile widened slightly. We prefer to think of it as delivering freedom at a fraction of light speed. But yes, your assessment is accurate. The debriefing continued for hours. Vasquez shared technical specifications, explained human tactical doctrine, and answered questions. She was patient and thorough. By the end, every commander in the room looked at humanity differently. As the meeting concluded and the holograms faded, Zixthar walked Vasquez back to her shuttle. The Galactic Council will want to discuss this new development. I suspect there will be significant interest in defensive pacts with humanity. We would welcome such discussions. Vasquez replied diplomatically. Zixthar hesitated, then spoke from the heart. When you arrived late to this battle, I thought you would be a liability, a burden to protect. Instead, you saved us all. I will not forget this lesson. Vasquez extended her hand in the human gesture of respect. Zixthar took it carefully, mindful of his greater strength. We all have different strengths, Commander. The key is learning to use them effectively. 3 weeks later, the Galactic Council convened to discuss the Battle of Valorian. The recordings had been reviewed. The sensor data analyzed. The results were undeniable. 7 species formally requested defensive alliances with humanity. 4 more requested technical exchanges. The Cravashi Dominion, humiliated by their defeat, sued for peace and withdrew from all disputed territories. And across the galaxy, military commanders updated their tactical assessments. The slow human ships with the massive forward structures were no longer jokes. They were designated as priority targets, capital-class threats, fleet killers. The Times UNSC Relentless Times and its sister ships gained a new nickname among the galactic community. The aliens called them slow death vessels, ships that arrived late but ended battles early. 6 months after Valorian, a border dispute erupted between 2 minor powers. Both sides called for allies. Both sides assembled fleets. Both sides prepared for war. Then, a single human Mac ship arrived in the system. The Times, UNSC. Inevitable asterisk. 3 days late to the gathering of forces, the ship broadcast a simple message. This is the UNSC Times Inevitable asterisk. We are here to enforce the ceasefire agreement. All vessels will power down weapons and begin peace negotiations immediately. One of the fleet commanders, a proud species that had never backed down from a fight, started to object. Then his sensor officer showed him the power readings from the human ship, showed him the technical data from Valorian, showed him what a single shot from that weapon could do. Both fleets powered down their weapons within the hour. Peace negotiations began that same day. An alien admiral, watching the human ship hold two entire fleets at bay without firing a shot. Made an observation that would be repeated across the galaxy for years to come. "The humans have arrived," he said quietly. "The battle is already over." Commander Vasquez, monitoring the situation from the bridge of the times, relentless times in a different system, heard about the peaceful resolution. She smiled and turned to Lieutenant Chen. "I think they are starting to understand," she said. Chen grinned. "That slow and steady wins the race?" "No," Vasquez replied. "That slow and devastating ends the race before it begins." The Times, relentless times, continued its patrol route, engines pushing its massive frame through the stars at a speed that made faster species shake their heads in disbelief. But no one mocked the human ships anymore. Humanity had found its place in the galaxy. Not as the fastest, not as the most advanced, but as the species you did not want to fight. The species that proved overwhelming force and patient precision could triumph over speed and elegance. The galaxy had learned its lesson. And the slow human ships, arriving late to every conflict, had become the most feared weapons in known space.